The 17th century in Ireland marked a period of intense suffering for the Catholic population, largely driven by the rise of Puritan ideology and the arrival of Oliver Cromwell. This dark chapter in Irish history saw the Catholic majority subjected to violent repression, which not only reshaped Ireland's political and social landscape but also deeply scarred the Irish identity for generations. Cromwell's campaign in Ireland went beyond military conquest. It was a systematic effort to eradicate Catholicism, alter the land ownership structure, and suppress Irish culture. This short documentary examines the religious, political, and social aspects of the Cromwellian persecutions, their human cost, and the lasting legacy they left on Irish history. The animosities that led to the Cromwellian persecution of Irish Catholics did not arise in isolation but were deeply rooted in centuries of English domination. England's growing control over Ireland began with the establishment of the English monarchy's authority and intensified during the 16th and 17th centuries. This control was characterized by aggressive policies, such as the Plantation of Ulster, which replaced native Irish populations with Protestant settlers from England and Scotland. These settlers were not merely landholders but also proponents of Protestantism, which stood in sharp contrast to the Catholicism that defined the Irish people. The situation worsened with the Irish Rebellion of 1641. What began as a Catholic uprising against English oppression, spurred by land dispossession, religious persecution, and economic marginalization, was soon used as a pretext for broader repression. The English Parliament, which by then had adopted Puritan ideals, viewed the rebellion as not just a political threat but as a religious one. The Puritans, already hostile to Catholicism, believed in the necessity of eradicating what they saw as a corrupt and heretical faith. Their response to the rebellion, therefore, was not tempered by diplomacy or reconciliation but driven by a zealous commitment to religious and political orthodoxy. Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the parliamentary forces during the English Civil War, was an uncompromising Puritan who sought to impose religious uniformity across the territories under his control. His military campaign in Ireland, launched in 1649, stands as one of the most brutal in Irish history. Cromwell's invasion of Ireland was not solely a military operation aimed at defeating Irish resistance. It was part of a broader ideological mission to make Ireland as Protestant as England. Cromwell's army ravaged towns, executed prisoners, and destroyed entire communities, including civilians, priests, and monks. The massacres at Drogheda and Wexford, where thousands of Irish civilians, including women and children, were slaughtered, are among the most infamous events of this period. Cromwell's forces justified these atrocities as necessary to secure victory and prevent further uprisings. However, for many Irish Catholics, these events were not merely military victories but brutal expressions of religious intolerance. The destruction was not limited to the battlefield. Cromwell's army systematically targeted religious symbols, including churches, monasteries, and other Catholic institutions, which were not just cultural symbols but vital components of Irish identity. The Cromwellian campaign in Ireland sought to achieve more than military victory. It aimed to break the very spiritual and social foundations of the Catholic population. This effort was manifested in several key areas. Perhaps the most enduring impact of Cromwell's campaign was the extensive land confiscation that followed. The English Parliament, under Cromwell's leadership, expropriated vast tracts of land from Irish Catholics, especially from the old Gaelic nobility. The land was redistributed to Protestant settlers, most often of English or Scottish origin. This redistribution not only decimated the economic power of the Catholic landowners but also reinforced the social and political dominance of the Protestant settlers. The new landowners, often settlers who had no historical connection to Ireland, implemented policies that further marginalized the Irish population, creating a rigid social hierarchy that persisted for centuries. Cromwell's forces also targeted Catholic religious institutions in an attempt to eliminate the visible symbols of Catholicism. Churches, monasteries, and abbeys were destroyed or repurposed, eradicating some of Ireland's most important cultural landmarks. The Catholic Church in Ireland had long been a unifying institution, providing not only spiritual guidance but also social services, education, and charity. The destruction of these institutions sought to sever the Irish people from their cultural and religious roots, rendering them more vulnerable to English control. The persecution of Catholic clergy was a central component of the Cromwellian campaign. Catholic priests, who were seen as the spiritual leaders of the Irish population and key figures in the maintenance of the faith, were actively hunted by Cromwell's forces. Many were captured, imprisoned, or executed. This suppression of religious leadership sought to weaken the Catholic faith's presence in Ireland and prevent the clergy from offering any form of resistance to English rule. Beyond military tactics, the legal and social policies enacted by the Cromwellian regime sought to further marginalize Irish Catholics. The penal laws, which began to be enforced in earnest after Cromwell's campaign, systematically discriminated against Catholics. They were barred from owning land, holding public office, practicing law, and attending school. These laws were not just punitive but aimed at eradicating the Catholic community's ability to function as a cohesive political, social, and cultural entity. Over time, the policies led to the entrenchment of a two-tier society, where Catholics faced systemic disadvantage and Protestants, particularly English settlers, were favored. The human toll of the Cromwellian persecutions cannot be overstated. The death toll from the massacres, combined with the long-lasting effects of famine, disease, and forced displacement, was devastating. Thousands of Irish men, women, and children were either killed outright or forced to flee their homes, facing famine and disease along the way. The Irish population was decimated, with estimates suggesting that up to 40% of the population may have died during this period. The psychological trauma inflicted upon the survivors was also profound. The violence and destruction left deep scars on the Irish psyche, creating a sense of fear, betrayal, and hopelessness that would resonate for generations. The Cromwellian persecutions were not merely an immediate disaster but a lasting trauma that shaped the cultural and political identity of Ireland for centuries. The consequences of Cromwell's campaign against Irish Catholics rippled through Irish history, leaving a lasting imprint on the nation's political, social, and religious life. The divisions that emerged during this period continued to shape Irish society for centuries. The bitter religious and political divisions that were entrenched during the Cromwellian era continued to define Irish identity. The Protestant ascendancy, which emerged as a result of Cromwell's policies, remained in power for several centuries, and the Catholic majority remained marginalized, both socially and politically. These divisions contributed to the long history of conflict in Ireland, which included the Williamite War, the 19th century struggles for Catholic emancipation, and, eventually, the Irish War of Independence. The hardships of this period, including the forced displacement of many Irish Catholics, contributed significantly to the creation of the Irish diaspora. Tens of thousands of Irish Catholics, particularly those from the landowning class, fled to continental Europe, where they formed expatriate communities and continued to play a role in European military and political affairs. The Irish diaspora, especially in the Americas, became a vital source of cultural and political support for the Irish cause. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Cromwellian period was the rise of Irish nationalism. The brutal treatment of Irish Catholics, coupled with the long-standing oppression they faced, sowed the seeds of a desire for Irish independence. Over time, this desire grew into a movement for national self-determination that culminated in the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. The struggles for political independence in the 19th and 20th centuries were shaped by the historical memory of Cromwellian persecution and the desire to rectify the injustices that had been perpetrated against the Irish people.